In this video, we're going to be going over the settings for on-premise enterprise for ThunderPOS for Windows. This is covering a situation where you have a multi-store chain that is using our enterprise product to manage the entire chain, but you're using local databases rather than our cloud product. So if you're using our cloud product, then this would not apply to you. But for those who are managing their own databases, then this is where you want to look. So I've got a VM. We're going to be looking at a store that's got our corporate, setup as well as its own store server. And we're going to do that mostly so that we don't have to worry about flipping back and forth between different machines for this video. But obviously, you may have these on different machines. And of course, since you're multi-store, you'll have store server in multiple places. For those unfamiliar, you will have a single corporate server for your entire chain. That's where your central data resides. Things like your customer balances or the master list of items, that sort of thing. You will have some number of corporate clients, at least one, that can connect in. They don't have to be on the same computer as the corp server, but they do need to connect to it in order to actually manage those things. And then you'll have one store server at each location that manages the data for that store, and then however many registers you have. And there are settings in each of these places for setup, but most of them are pretty straightforward. It's just a matter of pointing at the right connection. There's a few we're going to go over in much more detail because they are options that control kind of how your store behaves. And those are primarily set through any one of the corp clients. But I actually do have it already running here. So we're going to take a look here. You can see there's store server right there, and corp server behind it here. So these two programs at all times, you should have them running unless you have a real reason not to, because they are, your corp server should be running at all times that your stores are doing business so that it can keep up with, balance changes and all of that stuff. Your store server should be open anytime that store is running, or that you're going to want to pull reports if you are external reporting. But that is all, kind of an operations thing. If you have to bring them down to apply updates or whatever, that's totally fine. You just want to keep them running most of the time. If you try to close them, you'll notice that it'll actually warn you that you shouldn't just exit, and it'll offer you the option to minimize and keep running. Anytime you minimize it, it will be down in the tray here like this. And if you just double click it, it'll bring it back up. But to see the settings, it will ask you to set up the settings initially when you first run the programs, but we're going to just stop services and take a quick look at corporate server settings. There's not that many of them because corp server runs on its own thing. But you will need to set the port that it runs on, a username and password. This just needs to be the same everywhere, and then a backup directory, and that's where backups will get made. And then you can choose to have the corporate API enabled that allows for certain data to get pulled. We're not going to go into that in too deep here. So if we save these settings and then we start the services here. So similarly in store server, we've got our settings here. You can see where the port that the store server runs on, the store ID of the local store. So this should be different at every store. The username and password that you're using. And then if we go into enterprise here, then we need to point at the corporate IP address and the corp server port. If you hit suggest, it will give you the external IP address of your corporate store, which for most of your locations is likely to be correct. But if you're running on the same computer, it may not work, and you may just need to use the loopback like what I've done here, or you can manually configure it if it's something else because of particular situations like you're using a VPN or something like that. So the suggestion is the most common thing that would work, but it may not work depending on your particular circumstances. And then you can set up automatic syncing. We would generally recommend you set this to the shortest time possible so that it automatically pulls updates every few minutes from the corporate, and that's just how long it will take for it to get updates after you make a change that would affect it. Um, and then below that, you can set for new items if you have the option on the send new items option, which we'll go over here in a minute on, then these affect whether items are taxable when they are initially created at this store. That's a store specific setting because it's possible you'll have different tax jurisdictions on your different stores, obviously, if they are in different states or even just different counties. The way that tax needs to be collected and whether you need different tax rates broken out may be different. So that's the store server settings. So like I said, those two are very straightforward. For Corp Client, there's a couple of settings screens. One of them is kind of specific to this particular copy of Corp Client, and the other is much more broad. So we'll get it to come up here. I've already got it up. So if we go to options here, these are the chain-wide settings, and they actually are not things you should change casually. You shouldn't like constantly be changing these. These generally should either be on or off, and unless you're changing like major operations things, you should leave them alone once you've decided what they are. But the options here, the top several, determine whether or not you are managing that centrally or leaving it to the particular stores. So if you turn off manage customers or manage gift cards, your customers or your gift cards will not be managed chain wide. They will only be available at the specific store that they are created at. Same with items and vendors. Manage min maxes. That indicates that you're going to set your reorder levels and everything at the store specifically. So all of those options, usually once you've decided what you're going to do, you're going to leave them alone. The vast majority of customers are going to want to leave all of those turned on. So those are probably ones you don't want to touch after that unless you are making an operational change to say we are no longer going to do customers centrally. And even then you should probably consider the implications of that. However, the bottom four are a little different. They're much more just how the thing behaves once you're doing that. So for these two, the send new items and send new customers, they're very similar. Basically, if you have them on, then a new item that gets created anywhere will get added to all of your stores automatically without you needing to pull it. If you don't do that, then to create the item locally, you'll just have to hit add item, and when you scan the barcode, it'll grab it from your central database. But if you want to automatically have it added in, and most customers do, you'll check that box and it will create that record locally. Now, somewhat more uncommon is whether or not you are going to send new customers. This is a relatively new option. This one does the same thing I just described, except with items. It's whenever a customer gets added, they automatically get added all of your stores. If you don't do that, you can search for customers or add them using the customer number to share them between the stores, and they'll pull them as necessary. But if you have this on, it will automatically send them out to the stores. And the reason to not do that would just to make it easier to find the customers who actually are at your store. So if your chain is pretty geographically separated and customers are not typically going from one store to another, you may choose to not share customers automatically like that. Or you may not share manage customers at all. That's kind of up to you. And then the last two options here are also very similar to one another. They select whether or not you are allowing the user to update their items at the store level. You can always create new items at the store level, assuming that the employee has permissions to do that. But if this option is off, you cannot modify the centrally controlled fields like pricing is probably the big one, but also title and description and many other fields. at the store level. You have to do it through Corp Client. If you check this box, you can manage those things at store level and send updates to the other stores. So if they change it at a store, it will send it out to your other stores, and that price will change for those other stores as well. And similarly, you can do the same for creating and updating consigners. Both of those are things that previously are locked down if you don't check that. Um, but for items, you can always create a new item at the store level if you have permission to do that. Whereas for consigners, if this option is on, all of that has to be done through Corp Client. The other set of settings in Corp Client is here under the Settings menu. It's very straightforward. This is what you'll have to fill out when you first come in. You just have to point at the Corp server. If you're running on the same machine as the Corp server, then just the loopback info can work. And then so it's worth mentioning the enterprise username and password needs to match what you have at the Corp server when we did those settings. The corporate username and password is a security thing where it just asks you that when you start up. And then the new and used item prefix in Corp Client, that's very uncommonly used. The only thing it's used for is if you're doing a import into a store transfer currently. But if you're scanning barcodes that you've printed with a prefix through the ThunderPOS option that uses that, then you'll want to have that set, or else those barcodes won't work and those items won't get recognized for importing there. And then finally, beyond that, the last place we have settings that we have to fill out here are in ThunderPOS itself. And you'll have to set these on each station because it can be different from station to station. And it's just under the enterprise settings here. You will only be able to set these settings if you are on an enterprise license and you are selecting between cloud enterprise and on-premise enterprise. And you can fill in, your IP address info for your Corp server and for the store server, and then the ports and username and password. So that's very straightforward relative to the rest of it. Essentially, you should already have that information from other places, but it needs to be able to communicate with those other places, and that's how it does it. But if you're using this solution, you will always be on-premise enterprise. If you're using the cloud enterprise solution, you would not have store server or Corp server or any of those. So any questions or any problems you have with this setup, you can always talk to us about. The kind of area to focus on really is the corporate client ones, because those are the ones that will really control the behavior of your chain. But that kind of gives a sense for what the on-premise enterprise can do. And we'll have some other videos running through those features in more detail.